My name is Danny O'Shea. I go by Lifting Vegan Logic on YouTube. It was around 2015, the year I graduated high school, that I decided to fully go vegan. The year prior to that, I was eating more so plant-based for health reasons. And the reason for that was because my brother was already in it for ethical reasons. And being my big brother, we're very tight. So he would kind of jokingly shame me every day as I brought home a chicken burrito or something like that. Because when I say plant-based, I mean I was eating plant-based 6 days a week, and then once a week I would just not really care. It was more for health reasons. And then I came across Earthlings and Gary Yourofsky's speech, and it became abundantly clear to me that I had no arguments in defense of my actions. And then I eventually made the full switch, and by the time I made the full switch, I was so familiar with eating plant-based that it happened overnight. But of course that was going to be because I was eating it 6 days a week, So it's been about 7 years, it will be in June, about 7 years of being fully ethically vegan. And yeah, I have no regrets, and the deterioration has not started yet. Prior to going plant-based, I was almost like a meathead in high school. I was very into like lifting and powerlifting. So a lot of my protein sources were things like whey protein, and I had a lot of turkey sandwiches, and I wasn't more so doing any of this for health. It was more like just to make gains and like to, you're in high school, so everyone's trying to get like jacked. There's like the football team and like all those things. So my diet wasn't really related to health. It was more so just to be as big as possible. It was very bro-like. Didn't consume egg whites, which I know a lot of people do who are not vegan but are, adhering to the fitness lifestyle. And and then once I went plant-based, I just swapped my protein sources. I'd replace the turkey with things like legumes or tofu or tempeh. And it was a very easy switch for me, in all honesty. When I went vegan, I definitely noticed the cognitive dissonance that I felt while being plant-based. Like that cognitive dissonance went away, because it was around 6 days a week that I was eating plant-based. And I was aware of the ethics, but when it came to that 7th day of the week where I would not really care and hang out with friends and whatever and eat animal products, I'd feel continuous guilt over this. And it's hard to just be aware of all the atrocities you're supporting while knowing that you actually know how to not do it, because I was doing it for 6 days, but then still continuing to do it on the one day, right? I'm not gonna sit here and be one of those vegans that said like, I went full vegan and I just felt immortal or something like that. But I did feel, from a psychological perspective, a bit more clear, conscientiously, like morally. I didn't have the guilt. And I would just say that because I was already plant-based for 6 days, it's hard to imagine why that one extra day would make a difference. Maybe a better question would be like, did I feel different going plant-based initially? Because I was more omnivorous prior to that. And I would say I felt a little lighter for sure. My digestion was better. And I have Crohn's disease, so I noticed the plant-based diet was also better for me in that regard. And this was before even reading the data on that, so I found that out after the fact, and I was like, wow, I'm eating plant-based and it's actually good for my disease, So yeah, those are the main differences though. Sorry to the vegans watching that want me to say like I felt immortal and everything, I was immune to every disease ever. Wasn't the case, but still a great decision nonetheless. So I was officially diagnosed I think in 2017, but it was very clear in hindsight that I had it back in 2014 when around when I started becoming plant-based. Now again, to be clear, prior to becoming plant-based, I had the symptoms of Crohn's, but we didn't identify it as Crohn's. And Crohn's is actually a very hard thing to diagnose. If you even ask a gastroenterologist, how do you diagnose Crohn's, they'll give you very vague answers because there's a lot of overlap between various gastrointestinal diseases. I looked into things like animal protein and its effect. And to be clear, the data on Crohn's disease isn't too concrete because we don't have that many like randomized control trials on it or intervention studies. But high fiber diets, low in animal protein have been like basically through epidemiology shown to be good for it. And I happened to be eating that without even knowing that that's what I should be eating. And I'm the only person in my family who has Crohn's out of 5 other people who have Crohn's who is in remission and not taking any meds. So people in my family, they're not vegan, they're not plant-based, and they're still suffering. And the ones who are not suffering are on meds still to not suffer. And I'm just completely free of it. To be clear though, I'm not saying like screw your meds, go plant-based and you'll cure everything, but that's just my little anecdote, and it is reflective of the totality of evidence with respect to Crohn's disease and plant-based diets.
Were you having more symptoms after going vegan that made you get diagnosed in 2017?
It was a time when I was vegan, but I was staying farther away from the whole food plant-based vegan lifestyle. So I was eating a lot of the processed stuff and a lot of refined sugar, which from what I remember, I believe like refined sugars was not good at all as well for gastrointestinal health and for people that have a genetic predisposition for these kinds of disorders or diseases. So I started to, at that point, reintroduce the whole food plant-based eating. And it was a little odd because when I was plant-based and not vegan, I was doing that. And then once I went vegan, I got super into like all the mock stuff, probably because I missed a lot of the meat products. But yeah, so once that happened, I did get on meds and anti-inflammatory steroids. And then I got weaned off of those and was put on a more long-term kind of medical intervention. And I cleaned up my diet as well. And then over time, I just got kind of lazy with the meds. And I noticed that the lower my dose was, I still felt perfect. And I kept incrementally lowering my dose until I wasn't taking it at all. And the symptoms never came back. So in the literature, it's just called remission. This applies to a lot of diseases. It's hard to fully attribute it to the plant-based diet, but it is interesting to see that my family members who still are consuming things like dairy and meat still are suffering. And we have similar genetics, so maybe it's not as bad of an anecdote to share as the average, right?
What kind of foods are beneficial, living with something like that?
So I'm only just going to go off of what the literature says, but just high fiber, staying away from processed foods, which can be it can be a very vague term, but the standard American diet, or like the SAD diet, is considered to be one of the worst things somebody can be consuming when trying to fight a gastrointestinal disease like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. So I try to just around 6 days a week for now, I just stay away from the more processed stuff, and then once a week I will have like the vegan processed junk, and for me that's worked perfectly. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what's a typical day like what are you eating on a typical day?
I eat like almost like a total macro counting gym bro. So a lot of like oatmeal with protein powder and fruits, soy milk, nuts and seeds. Also smoothies as well. It depends if I'm like cutting or bulking. If I'm trying to bulk and I want to be less satiated so I can consume more calories, I'll have like giant smoothies comprised of like soy milk, peanut butter, dates, protein powder, bananas, and things like that. And then when I'm cutting, I'll make sure it's not really a liquid kind of meal, more of a physical one, so I'm more satiated. And I love whole grains. So, and I'm also a big fan of pasta, which isn't the most high in fiber, but I'll try to combat that with eating things like legumes. So I like to eat a lot of pasta, legumes, rice, quinoa. Tofu and tempeh, I used to eat in like an alternating fashion, but over time I've just realized that I love tofu more than tempeh, so there's no point in alternating, so I just stick to tofu. And then a lot of fruit, just in general. Even though I have like those fruit smoothies, I'll still, like at night, to combat my sugar cravings, I'll just have like fruit in the form of apples or watermelon, whatever is in the house really. But yeah, I've always been a big fan of fruit. Even when I wasn't vegan, like fruit was like one of my staples, so.
A lot of people say maybe the most important meal of the day is like a salad. Do you kind of feel the same way, or try to hit like all these categories like beans, greens, grains, fruits, veggies, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, like all the main categories? Or are you just worried about macros and whatnot?
No, I as I get older, I'm caring less about macros and physique and like strength and more about longevity. So in the recent years, I made sure to have oatmeal every single day, blueberries every single day. What else? Leafy greens every single day. Sometimes I get a little lazy with it, but I notice that as I'm getting older, I'm caring more about eating for functionality and longevity as opposed to just getting like jacked. So I do try to get like, I like Michael or Dr. Greger's The Daily Dozen kind of thing, so I'll stick to whole grains, green leafy vegetables. Blueberries is one of his others, like a separate category. Then he has servings of fruit, and then he has nuts and seeds, and then legumes. So I try to get that, especially legumes. I mean, I've been looking a lot lately into like fiber and mortality, and it's like almost, it's like scientific consensus that like fiber is what we should be eating consistently in much higher doses than the average American is currently consuming. So.
Do you feel like there's some fitness advantages to being vegan or disadvantages when it comes to fitness specifically?
Yeah. There's absolutely no disadvantages. There's a lot of myths out there about how you might need to combine protein sources and things related to that, and like how like you need to get a certain amount of leucine. But when you're someone who's into fitness and you're already by default, because you're a fitness person, eating a huge amount of protein, the leucine amount is covered. You don't need to supplement leucine as a vegan. Like, as long as you're eating a decent variety of foods, you're fine. My problem with fitness in the non-vegan sense, the demand for high protein foods goes up. And if you're a non-vegan, that means way more animal products, which means way more animal suffering. So as a vegan, there's also the advantage of knowing that your increased protein intake isn't requiring more animal suffering than you'd have to otherwise support if you were a non-vegan. Physical advantages, I mean, I'll be honest, I can't really say. I mean, I've gotten my highest lifts as a vegan, but that's also just a matter of like the fact that time went by, and like I probably would have gotten those lifts anyway. I could make that observation if you want to be like technical. I did get my strongest lifts as a vegan, but I'm not going to sit here and say like if I had not gone vegan, I would not have got those lifts. Trying to be objective, right? But that's what I'd say about advantages and disadvantages for fitness.
I hear some of these fitness guys talk about like L-carnitine and carnosine, all these different things that they worry about. And is all this fitness stuff merely for just look at me, or kind of it's a hobby, I guess?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily health as much as it is maybe a hobby, right?
Yeah, I mean, bodybuilding is in many ways, not just physically, but psychologically, I would call it a very unhealthy sport. I mean, you're getting to a point where you have to dehydrate yourself and get to an hour of perfection that requires like starving yourself and all these other things. And then of course, if you're using like anabolic steroids or things like that, there's the health loss of that. Then there's a psychological aspect of possibly getting like body dysmorphia or muscle dysmorphia, or feeling like you're fat because you're not 5% body fat and you don't have veins like protruding out of your everything, They consider it a sport. I guess I can call it a sport. It doesn't take much athleticism, obviously. You're just moving weights from point A to point B. It's a means of aesthetic pursuit, and I can appreciate like a good physique, but from a health perspective, it doesn't seem like bodybuilding is one of those sports that you'd want to do compared to something like, I don't know, like long distance running or something like that. That doesn't like hinge on you worrying about how you look aesthetically to these random judges who base their standards off of some objective measures, but also there's like a bit of subjectivity to it as well. And you're like almost like succumbing to the whims of their opinion. It's a little weird to me. I've been asked before if I would ever do bodybuilding. I'm like, no. I think powerlifting is a little cooler because it's a bit more performance based. But even powerlifting, like these sports don't have much to do with health. Now the carnitine and carnosine stuff, I mean, this person would have to just show that our bodies don't create either of these two nutrients to a degree that would maximize muscle growth. And if they were to provide that data, I mean, you can get vegan carnitine and carnosine in the form of a supplement. So I don't know why you would want to get those nutrients from foods that are probably unhealthy for you. Like if you can get either these nutrients from an animal product that's higher in saturated fat and all these other things that aren't good for us, or a supplement where you just don't have those issues, why would you not just go with the supplement? I don't see it as a strong reason to no longer be vegan because you thought you needed these nutrients, which in my view aren't even essential. And even if they were, you could just get them from a supplement instead that's vegan. And then of course there's the ethics of all this. Like, do you really need to start paying for these animals to be mass bred, exploited, and murdered for these nutrients that you probably don't need? And if you do, you could just get from a supplement. Like, no, you don't need to do that. So,
about your channel, what made you start lifting Vegan Logic, and how did you come up with that name and stuff?
Yeah, honestly, the name is, people think that like the name was some sort of intentional thing of like lifting vegan logic, like you're lifting vegan logic to the surface of the internet and you're showing people. But literally all it was I started on Instagram and I was like, I like lifting, I'm vegan, and I like logic. So I'm just gonna literally put these three words. That was all There's nothing deep about it. It's just like, I like lifting vegan and logic. It was more like a bro, just thought process, like 4 IQ points required to come up with this idea. But then it turned out to be this thing that actually made sense. And I didn't realize that it made sense until like someone pointed out, like someone was like, you're really lifting vegan logic. I'm like, at first I was like, what? I was like, oh, I guess, yeah, I'm lifting it up, I guess. So it worked out. The other question was what motivated me to do the channel. Well, I started on Instagram initially, and it was just posting like fitness pictures and maybe debunking some silly myths about plant protein and how vegans can't gain muscle. And then I just noticed that the platform of Instagram is such that it's one that I don't feel like I can fully express myself just in a caption and a picture. I know they brought out the IGTV videos, but like the algorithm really wasn't pushing those up. So I figured, why not make a YouTube channel? Because I have a lot more to say than just these like surface level pictures and like paragraph captions. And also, I don't believe that people go to Instagram for long-term digestive content. They more so do it for like just, oh, look at this, like real quick. It's like very fast paced. So then I went on YouTube, and this was after watching other vegan YouTubers for like 3 to 4 years and learning from them. And over time, I was just inspired to go forward with YouTube, and I love it. I mean, you'll see like over the years, my effort on Instagram has just gone down because I'm just focused way more on YouTube. It's way more fulfilling, and I get to just say what I want. You build more of a community. Your person is more there in people's face. They get to know who you are, as opposed to Instagram, which is a bit more shallow and like, you know, fast-paced and just trivial, I guess, more trivial.
Now, do you feel like your channel's focus is mostly on logic, like, you know, debunking myths and stuff like that?
Yeah, my channel's basis is to debunk anti-vegan nonsense for sure, as well as humor. If it made sense and it sounded good aesthetically, like my name should also be like lifting vegan sarcasm as well, because there's a lot of trolling and like sarcasm in my community. I take different clips of like Earthling Ed and different activists and like make these roast compilations. It's like kind of for fun though. It's to make vegans feel some kind of sanity, because I know a lot of people are isolated and don't have a lot of vegan friends. So I've got a message saying like, oh, your videos like give me life. Like I don't know any vegans in person, but this makes me like laugh, makes me feel better when I'm feeling alone. Here's the thing, I love sarcasm and like making fun of stupid shit. It's just kind of in any form, not just in the vegan sphere, right? But veganism is this movement and this idea where like if you object to it, there's a high likelihood that your objection is just like hilarious. Like it's so you're fighting against an idea that's based on like just stopping the mass breeding, exploitation, and murder of animals, and like the commodification of them, the forced artificial insemination, all these things. So there's a lot of room for my desire to make fun of stupid nonsense to be expressed in the vegan community. There's many other things I'd like to like parody and make fun of, but veganism just it takes the cake. Like just take 2 seconds to scroll through the anti-vegan subreddit. It's unbelievable, like the stuff you'll read in there. So I also like veganism because it gives me the chance to channel this desire of mine to just make fun of stupid shit. I guess.
What are some of the most ridiculous things you hear people come up with? You know,
There's
plants feel.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's people that will just say, this is the very simple one we've all heard, like, oh, I just like meat. And like, when you think of these things in the context of like a moral philosophy or something, or just common ethics, it's like, you're saying that like the pleasure you derive from this suffering and death outweighs the long living potential life that this animal could have had, the suffering they endure. Like this 10 seconds or like a couple minutes of a meal is just more important than this. Like that is, to me, it's like psychotic in some form. In no other context are we saying like, oh, like I feel good doing this thing that causes so much suffering, so who cares? Like that's insane, right? Obviously, the plants' rights activists are another thing that they try to advocate for plants, although I would say that most of the time they're just looking for a way to appeal to hypocrisy and trying to combat veganism. They'll just say, oh, well, you do this, so I get to do this kind of thing. I don't know if these people sincerely believe that a plant feels pain. I don't think they genuinely feel bad when they walk on grass. It's probably just like a cop-out thing. I've heard somebody say that they believe that meat has a property that gives us bloodlust or something, some like
Gives us
primitive
what was that?
bloodlust, like some alpha primitive energy that's needed to sustain the human race in a way that makes us more domineering and of course they didn't cite any sources for this, and they said that if the U.S. stopped consuming meat and then China continued consuming meat, they would beat us because we're out of touch with this bloodlust or this thing, this property that is in meat that would make us so much better battlemen and warriors. It's just insane stuff like that. Like, how did you even come to that conclusion? Like, what science? I don't know.
What about the barley men? You know?
Yeah, right.
And then of course, there's well, we've always done it, kind of.
Oh yeah, that's a really good argument. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we've also done for a long time. Just think of anything bad that humans do that has been happening for a long time, and then ask yourself if it's now ethical because it's been happening for a long time. I'm not even sure it's hard. Some of these things are so silly that it's just like, what do you mean X has been happening for a long time, so we should just keep doing it? Like slavery, like all these things, killing, war, tribalism, they've been happening for a long time. And also I'm just curious, at what point of time does it make, what amount of time is it now okay to consider something good because it happened for a long time? Is it 200 years? Oh, it's been happening for 200 years. Let's go, bro. Let's keep it going. Where is the line even drawn? So there's multiple layers of why that's insane. It's just like the appeal to popularity. Everybody eats meat. Okay. At one point, everybody was racist, or most people were racist. Does that mean racism was justified? Then, of course not. There's just a lot of weird reasons people will give. Eating meat is natural. I can entertain that premise and say, yeah, it's natural. So is disease and hurricanes and tornadoes. But we take measures to prevent these things that are natural. If you're going to say that something is good because it's natural, presumably you think that everything is good. Everything that is natural is good, which is insane. Imagine not preventing disease and hurricanes and stuff because you wanted to preserve nature, which is that's a whole other thing too. Nature is not a pretty thing. It can be, but it's not categorically a pretty thing. There's instances where nature is horrific, and instances where it's not horrific. It's beautiful. Arsenic is a naturally occurring thing. Should we consume it because it's natural? Probably not, right? What about the jobs of people who run animal agriculture? Because an action causes you to have income, or it constitutes a job, shouldn't be used as a justification for you to continue in that action. If the action causes suffering and death, and it's literally something bad, we shouldn't be oh, but it's your job, so we're gonna let it continue. Of course, there's the nutritional myths and the protein myths, which have all been debunked immensely. There's things oh, morality is subjective, though, which I agree. I'm a moral subjectivist. I'm not convinced that the universe or there's some objective property about morality, or that the universe has an opinion on something. I think that at the end of the day, our moral systems come down to our subjective preferences. But the thing is that in no other scenario, at least in my view, to this day, I've never seen someone respond to a human issue like racism or sexism and say, oh, but you know what, morality is subjective, so who cares? It's yes,
double standard, right?
Right. It's why do you say this in the case of animal rights, but not in the case of human rights? If someone was a serial killer and you wanted to stop them, and they're oh, imagine Jeffrey Dahmer being oh, but morality is subjective, though. There's no way these people are going to be oh, true. Okay, no, go ahead. Go do what you're going to do. Go eat those humans, right? No, not to I guess I am plugging my book here, but you don't have to buy it. If you want, you can just email me and I'll send it to you for free. But I made an ebook that goes over about 40 to 44 or so arguments against veganism. And it goes in order from the silliest to the most difficult ones to respond to. And I cover all of this in depth. It includes the protein, though, the bacon, though, the morality is subjective, though. There's one, I believe there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, which some people will say that as a justification for them to continue to engage in this unethical consumer process of animal products, which is a little odd because these are the same people who advocate for things like fair trade and supporting businesses that have better working conditions, which implies that they believe that the suffering scale and the unethicality of the consumerism and capitalism exists on a spectrum. And so if they acknowledge that it exists on a spectrum and that you should support fair trade instead of like maybe buying from Nike or something, then presumably you look at the spectrum and ask yourself, where does animal agriculture land here? This is a system that literally breeds animals into existence. They're living in their own feces. They're cannibalizing each other sometimes because they're so confined. It's an environment for disease to proliferate. They're exploited. They're murdered. Where does this stand on the spectrum of suffering? And why do you advocate for fair trade but not going vegan? Animal agriculture is much worse than these other systems that also are not good, but don't cause you to die. Like they don't bring you into existence and exploit you and kill you and commodify you and all these things. So there's that one too, which is often cited by people on the left side of the political spectrum that are not vegan. And to be clear, like I lean more left. I'm not saying like I don't associate with left people. I'm just saying that their arguments are pretty bad. And it's odd because they're so for fighting against oppression of others, but they won't fight for the literally most oppressed beings on the planet, like animals. So presumably if there was a group of humans that were being bred into existence for food and exploited and killed, they would fight against that. And I guess this is probably the most common argument, right? I mean, people will just say like it's okay to kill animals for food, but not humans because of the difference in intelligence. And usually you got to ask someone like, what do you mean by difference in intelligence? Like, because intelligence is a very broad term, right? Sometimes they'll say something like, oh, animals don't have a sense of tomorrow. It's like, okay. So presumably then, if a human possesses such cognitive deficits that they don't have a sense of tomorrow, it would be ethical to breed and consume them for food. Because you're telling me that what justifies the differential treatment between humans and animals is this level of intelligence difference. So if I find a human who possesses that level of intelligence difference, you should be cool with eating them. And that's another weird position people have where they say like lower intelligence justifies exploiting and murdering a particular being. There are humans that are born with such cognitive deficits that they actually, you can argue, they're not as intelligent as these animals that we kill, especially pigs, who are very intelligent. And the end conclusion of walking someone through what it means to say that difference of intelligence justifies differential treatment is that it isn't levels of intelligence that we care about that makes us want to give humans rights. It's the fact that they're sentient. And the reason for this is because they still are giving rights to these disabled humans who arguably have lower sentience than these animals that we kill. And the reason is because they're sentient, because they can feel pain and they can suffer, which animals also possess. So the end conclusion of that little like consistency test is to point out that sentience is what matters, not levels of intelligence. We even have instances where families have like a dog and a daughter and a son and whatever, and they acknowledge, okay, yeah, we don't value the dog as much as our human children, but we still value them to the point that we don't think it's ethical to kill them for food, right? So you can even acknowledge that there is a difference in moral value and intelligence, but still say that still the suffering and death of this animal and the prevention of it matters, right? That's the really weird one. And some people will get into very weird territories where they try to be consistent and they bite the bullet and they say, oh yeah, I think it's okay to kill humans with cognitive impairments. And I don't think that they genuinely believe this a lot of the time. I think that they're trying to be consistent with their reasoning, which is a very disgusting thing in my view. All just so you can feel good about consuming your cheeseburger that you can consume in a plant-based fashion with Beyond Meat or Impossible or whatever. I can keep going. I mean, there's so many. That's why I said like at the end of the day, like you just check out the book. If you can't afford it, just send me an email, I'll send it to you. It's a really good read and it tackles basically 95% of the arguments you're gonna hear online.
It's interesting you mentioned the dog and stuff, and I was thinking about Alex Hershaft, who I interviewed recently, and he said, people they'll pay to help their dog in the event that it's injured or sick, while a human down the street who's injured or sick will go without money and suffer, and they'll take care of their dog before they'll take care of a human down the street in the same block even, As far as like how we've gotten to this point. Do you think it's logical how we've gotten to this point? Because I kind of feel like it's logical. In the beginning, we didn't know any better. We kind of probably thought we needed to eat animals, right? And now we're getting to a point where we realize we don't need to eat animals. And so it made sense before, and I think that's kind of important to realize that way we're not blaming history. Do you think history's kind of was logical how it unfolded and
I think I know what you mean by the word logical. I think you mean like how the universe was set up to be. It's understandable that we ended up in this way, and that could be because of things like biological anthropocentric bias. Like we naturally value our species more, probably for some sort of reason related to evolution and something that increases the chances of us reproducing. Like caring for a human more than this animal will lead to more outcomes in which you reproduce more humans and spread your genes further. So I think some things like that are probably why we naturally have this like view of the species, this kind of view. Even myself, as doing what I do, I value sentient life on a hierarchy based on levels of sentience. And even if you told me there was a pig that was more sentient than a disabled human, although I logically have this value system where I would say I should pick the pig, what I would do, I might be compelled by this, anthropocentric bias to still pick the human, and I can't help that. It's just like a feeling. I don't know if it's biologically innate or whatever. So probably it's something to do with that, like these like sort of like instinctual part of us that wants to procreate and create more humans. Things like, why do we think that we need meat? Do I think that it's logical that we ended up coming to believe that we need meat? My intuition says that like when you look at meat or animals or something, you might get this feeling that like they possess something very substantial that we need, and maybe we need some combination of both plants and animals to thrive. It doesn't even matter evolutionarily what we've been adapted to consume or anything. What ultimately matters with health is going to be like health outcomes. So if we come up with things that are completely outside of nature, like a B12 supplement, and it leads to good outcomes, that should go head to head with like these other things that we deemed are more natural but give us nutrients, like animal products. And if we discover that animal products come with some burden of disease, we can say that, okay, well, maybe getting B12 from animals isn't worth it because it comes with all these other risks. And let's just take the supplement instead and consume like whole food plants. Now that was kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I understand why we came to this point, especially morally with like how we view humans and animals. I think it has much to do with what I said about evolution. And it's fascinating to me that even though I do this every day, and I'm filming videos and I'm debating people, advocating for animal rights, even still, despite all of this, despite all the footage, that situation with the higher sentient pig and the lower sentient human, I feel some inclination to save the human, even though I know that it's not actually right. Now, some people might think that's crazy, like, what, you're comparing a pig to a human? It's like, I'm not equating them like in some like absolute form. I'm saying if we knew all these variables, like this human had less capacity for well-being, they couldn't produce humans that are like you and I, and then this pig can produce more pigs and that have higher capacity for well-being, and this pig themselves has higher capacity for well-being. Like I would have to choose them, right? In the name of increasing well-being and lowering suffering, right?
Part of it also, though, as we've advanced in technology and evolved in all these different ways, so really fast over the last couple hundred years.
Oh yeah.
In the beginning, there was only so many TV channels. There's only like a couple of TV channels. How old are you?
25.
I'm almost 50. So when I was a kid, there was only like 2 or 3 channels, on the TV.
Yeah.
Milk is good for the body, kind of stuff, was all we saw. So it made sense that we were being told this message and we were just kind of following orders.
Yeah.
So it's kind of logical that we got into this mess because of how everything evolved and unfolded. And now we have all this information and we can get more accurate information and more scientific. So I feel like it's kind of logical how we got to this point.
Yeah, if information pathways are scarce and you only have like a couple things to expose yourself to, it only makes sense that you're going to do this. Like my mom, like I don't blame her for this, but me and my brother, like we had tons of dairy growing up, and it was because she was under the impression that like it was essential for strong bones. And it turns out it's not. And yeah, I don't blame her. It's just because of what she was exposed to. And most people don't have so much time that they're going to sit there and like analyze all the data and nutrition science. And right now it's true to say that, I mean, there is information overload. There's different camps of different nutritional diet groups. There's the keto, there's the vegan, there's the plant-based, there's like paleo, ancestral eating, all that stuff. And it's hard to know what to believe, especially today. Like back then it was easy to know what to believe because you only had like 3 options. Now it's just like there's like it's seemingly infinite amount of groups. And this is where I tell people that you should probably learn a little bit about nutrition science. If you're curious to know what the truth is, learn about the hierarchy of evidence, learn how to read data. I'm still learning to this day. I mean, there's so much to learn about this stuff. And to me, it's just a fascinating topic, but it also helps me in my content creation because so many people are making nutritional objections to the vegan lifestyle.
Has there ever been an argument that's been hard to debunk? What's the hardest one?
At the surface, the crop deaths argument can seem hard to debunk. And I think that a lot of vegans don't think of it in the right way, including me before I came across some of these ways to respond to it. But a lot of people make the claim that vegans are hypocrites because animals die in crop production and crop fields, and so technically the vegan diet causes death. Now, the difference between deaths caused by animal agriculture and deaths caused in plant agriculture is that the animals that die in plant agriculture, they already existed, whereas in the animal context, they were bred into existence and didn't exist prior. Now, the reason I'm making that distinction is because these animals are in the wild prior to being in a crop field. And there's actually some reason to believe that crop fields on the net might reduce suffering, because nature is not a nice place in terms of predator-prey cycles. There's animals being eaten alive, animals suffering and dying. So all I'm trying to say is that like people who accuse vegans of this crop death thing, it might actually be true that crop fields on the net, they actually reduce suffering, okay? Because these animals already existed and they are potentially avoiding a much worse condition. And in the case of animal agriculture, these animals that are killed literally did not exist before. And when you buy an animal product, you're literally creating a being that will suffer and that will die. So on the net, you are increasing suffering. So they're not really analogous like crop deaths and animal agriculture deaths. Now, I'm not saying I know for a fact that crop fields on the net are better than wild fields, but it is possible, right? And anyway, like, if we're looking at veganism from a suffering reduction perspective, and you assume that crop deaths cause more suffering than wild fields, all the crops that are needed to grow all these animals, like 70 billion land animals a year, I believe, possibly 80 billion now, that's going to outdo what we need for human beings. So even still, it's messed up. But I think it's very important that vegans don't just automatically accept that crop deaths are a bad thing. And also there's other things like, you know, if we had a mass food system and the only way for us to sustain our population was this mass food system, which it seems to be right now the case, and there were like animals that were disrupting this process and they were messing with our property and all these things, and there was no practicable way to stop them. And if we didn't, like, we would all suffer, and civilization probably couldn't function properly. It might be justified to defend your crops in this way. And that's very different from breeding an animal into existence, commodifying them, exploiting them, artificially inseminating them, all these things that we do to animals in this scenario. And I even, like, if you were to try to give me like a logic test on this and say, well, what if humans were doing these things to crops? So assuming everything I said, it's like if there was a hypothetical species of human that were like as intelligent as like maybe like mice and stuff, and they were going into crop fields and just ravaging everything and destroying stuff, I would probably think it's fine to in the name of like preserving civilization, defend our crops, you know. So but even still, the most important thing about this crop death thing is just that these people that make this hypocrisy accusation, first of all, they don't even know what vegans' values are. You shouldn't make an accusation of hypocrisy before questioning a vegan and seeing like where their morals lie. Okay, and secondly, they need to provide an argument, like a really good argument, to show that buying crops actually increases deaths on the net, or like buying crops causes more deaths than what would have otherwise occurred had the crop fields not been there and the wild was just happening. And also suffering, that's a huge aspect as well. If crop fields are keeping wild populations lower, which means that there's less suffering and less death, less disease, less starvation, whatever, crop fields might be a good thing. So are you saying that we should just remove all wildlife? I'm not saying that because I don't know what the long-term implications are of doing such a thing. But it might be the case that a world that is much less natural and more like artificial would be a world that causes less suffering. If we assume that the wild does come with all this suffering and death, and like wild animal suffering is a real thing. I mean, there's some literature on this too. But yeah, there's that which people vegans struggle with, and they automatically try to acknowledge that it is a bad thing. And I'm not really convinced that it is. And someone needs to run the calculations, I guess, right?
I'm glad you brought that up because I noticed you did a video on crop deaths.
Yeah.
And I did one too. I don't know if you know that, but
oh no, I haven't seen it.
yeah, I did a pretty elaborate one prior to even realizing you did one. If you add it up, it's profoundly more, like exponentially more animals are being slaughtered and dying as a byproduct from animal agriculture. The amount of crop deaths by kill from plant agriculture is so minuscule compared to the animal agriculture. It's not even a good argument at all.
And the crop deaths that come from the feed that we're feeding. Yeah.
And also, I don't know if this is accurate, but one cow needs like 2 acres for a cow and a calf pair. And every year this would produce about 500,000 calories. If you ate 2,000 calories a day, this would last a person less than a year, like 265 days. 2 acres of potatoes would generate 12 million calories as opposed to just 500,000.
Yeah.
And feeding about 17 people.
If you compare a plant-based system to animal-based, especially the grass-fed crowd and stuff, we don't even have a planet, like enough space.
Yeah, so
for that.
it's like
it's insane.
So according to these numbers, it's like we use less land, so we're not taking away the wild. 17 times less wild land away. So, and I've actually seen higher numbers. Some studies have even shown that we could replace animal products with plant products that have the same nutrient profiles and feed up to 20-fold more people. And when looking at the FAO's land usage chart, we can see just how much land animal agriculture uses and how much of the cropland goes into animal agriculture. And even if a significant portion of the cropland used for livestock feed is inedible by humans, if you take that out of the equation, the animals still need to be fed, so logically it's still relevant and needs to be accounted for. So let's take things a little further and extrapolate from that land usage chart. Livestock uses 90% of the currently used agricultural land and produces only 12% of what we eat. Plant-based food only uses 6% of agricultural land while producing 88% of what we eat. And even if these numbers are, say, 10-20% off, animal agriculture is still grossly inefficient. In other words, animal-based food requires 13 times more land while producing 7 times less than plant-based foods. And livestock also consumes 37 times more than the food they produce. Only about 29% of the earth is land, and of that land, just over a third is viable for agriculture, and livestock uses 90% of that land. By ending animal agriculture, we could feed over 88 billion more people plant-based. And this projection is so modest that it's almost 10 times smaller than the number I mentioned from that research earlier, predicting a 20-fold increase. Furthermore, with increased implementation of state-of-the-art vertical greenhouse technologies, we can take things up a level, exponentially 2-fold, every step of the way up, and the sky's the limit, and easily have more than enough to end world hunger, animal slaughter, premature deaths from behavioral diseases directly related to eating animals, and decrease significantly the odds of having another zoonotic disease outbreak pandemic while supporting longer lifespans in our infinitely ever-growing global population and fostering a non-violent world with unfettered access to our empathy and compassion for all earthlings. Are there any other major arguments that are really hard to debunk?
Yeah, there's one that the debunk to it is rather easy, but it's maybe on the surface it could feel a little weird. But the advocates of regenerative farming, they'll make claims we need to put animals on the land to keep the soil healthy, and monocropping is bad and whatever. And first of all, they need to prove this, provide data. I've never seen anyone do it, but even if they did, you just have to say so why do we have to kill them though? Like, let's let them roam free and be, in pasture. Well, why do we have to go and murder them, right? And if anything, it'd be less resource intensive to have to continue to make so many cows, and that's because you're killing them and you need to make more because you're killing them. So there's the like I can have a cow for a year, and that'll cause less deaths than being a vegan for a year. And there's so many problems with this. Like, first of all, the wild crop thing I talked about, like, you don't even know if being a vegan is a bad thing on the net. Like, you don't, like with the whole wild crop field thing. Secondly, just because an action, let's say hypothetically, an action causes less suffering than another, that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. We'll go with organ failure. So if there's 5 people on the way to organ failure, and you can go and kill 1 person, extract their organs and save 5, is it now ethical to just go ahead and kill random people to save all these other people because it'll lead to less suffering? Now, if you're a pure utilitarian, you're going to bite the bullet on this and think that murder is now okay in this 1-to-5 ratio context. Now, threshold deontology is the view that I more so take, which is the idea that like an action can be considered right if a certain threshold of utility that you can gain from it is surpassed. So if hypothetically somehow you can kill 1 person to save 1 trillion, just hypothetically, I'd probably say, okay, at that point it's okay. But when the ratio is 1-to-5, I don't think that that's ethical. Imagine living in a world where we were just killing random people on the street because, we're going to save 5. Like, you're also assuming that a vegan solely cares about suffering reduction when you make that claim. So even if it were shown you can kill 1 cow and that saves more lives than a crop field, which again is not even established, when you need to provide the wild land, cropland data comparative analysis, which none of them ever do. But so even if we assume that they did and it was all like whatever, we have to determine like where our values are, like see like if this is even worth it. Plus, they act like it's just 1 cow. Like this cow is grazing on land. They're walking on other beings. Like they have not done the calculations. They're just claiming randomly, 1 cow for a year, and I'm good. So yeah, there's just a lot to unpack, and they're very simple-minded in the way that they like try to make this point.
Yeah, and it's not just 1 cow because they need 2 because they got to produce another one.
Sure, right, yeah.
And so they need more acreage.
Yeah.
In which case they could have grown so many plants, and
yeah.
And if people are out there picking and stuff, nothing's dying. Like
right, and also we can make calculations. This is where you get really nitty-gritty, but like assuming, and I'm not even assuming, I think it's pretty true that increased saturated fat increases your LDL cholesterol, and there's a causal relationship between increased LDL and your chances of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease going up. Then you also have to factor in like the suffering entailed by people eating red meat and cows, and like how they would probably die early, and like family members would be upset. Like we also have to factor that into ethics as well. If people are going to die early, there's a lot. The suffering that will happen to the human, the suffering that happens to the animals, the area of land that the cow is walking on. When it comes to just comparing animal agriculture as it is today to veganism as it is today, just being a vegan, it's abundantly clear that the vegan lifestyle causes a net decrease in suffering because you are no longer bringing animals into existence to suffer and die. That's with remaining agnostic on the whole like cropland, wildland thing. You don't have to make any strong claims about that. You can just say, I'm agnostic on that. I don't even know, but I do know that I'm not causing these beings to literally exist that did not exist that are now going to suffer and die. That's by definition a net increase of suffering on the in the universe. So,
how do you define veganism?
Yeah, this is actually a tougher question than you think because there's so many different definitions of it. I know people like to talk about the Vegan Society's definition. I don't really like the part that talks about as far as is practicable or whatever. It's a very ambiguous terminology. So for me, veganism is a philosophy of trying to reduce the breeding, commodification, exploitation, and killing of animals for human benefit. And I put breeding in there because I think that's a very important aspect. Now, it isn't just about breeding though. Of course, there's things like hunting that are problematic too. Just giving animals rights to the same degree that we give humans rights. Because I personally cannot name a morally relevant difference between humans and animals such that I'd give humans these rights, but not animals. So it can sound bad to a meat eater to say veganism is essentially just logically extending the rights we give to humans to animals So there has to be all this like disclaimer of like, I'm not equating them. I'm just saying that in the context of the right to life and the right to not be murdered, we should be extending that to animals. Not the right to drive, not the right to vote. Like they don't have the cognitive capacities for that, but they do have the capacity to suffer and feel pain, and they clearly have a will to live if you watch slaughterhouse footage, like the way they act when they're entering the slaughterhouse. And just like we would give a disabled human the right to not be massacred or perpetually bred and exploited for human taste pleasure for like 10 minutes in a meal, we shouldn't do that to animals. It's very clear. And you got to just think about what you would want to if you were those animals, like, and you can analogize that to the human that has cognitive deficits. They suffer and they don't want to suffer.
In these 7 years or so that you've been doing this, what's been the most challenging thing for you to be a vegan?
I've been very blessed in ways. I have a lot of friends that are vegan. The majority of my family is not vegan, but a good amount is, such that like at family gatherings we're accommodated for. So it's hard to say, like, I can say the hardest thing, I guess, which is when I find myself in situations where I'm not around a bunch of vegans. So probably the social aspect is something that I think a lot of people don't talk about. It's probably one of the main reasons that people also may quit, because at the end of the day, like, human beings are social beings, and sometimes they can be motivated by things of that nature. So probably just the social aspect. When it comes to nutrition, no. Debating people, no. Just the social aspect, which also rarely hits me because I'm blessed in my scenario. There were points when I found that I was very much focused on what animals are going through to a degree where my mental health maybe took a little toll, because if you expose yourself to all this footage all the time and all these pictures and all the suffering, it's going to affect your mental health and your view of the world. You know, a vegan can simply follow a bunch of slaughterhouse footage pages or pages that just have like cute little animals like being cute, and their well-being will like go up drastically, right? So it was realizing too that I didn't need to see this footage anymore because I'm so aware of it. Yeah, so maybe the harder part a couple years ago was when I was like realizing what it was doing to my mental health, and then I took a step back, unfollowed some of these pages, which nothing against those pages. Like, there's obviously value to those pages for people that need to see it. But for someone who doesn't need to see it, there's not really much reason to do it if you care about your mental health.
Has the reason for you to be vegan now changed since you initially went? Like, is there anything that's more important for you right now?
I think because I got more into like activism and stuff, it's put me in the circles of other kinds of social justice activism, like human rights. And I've seen how much people are already talking about it. And it makes me feel less obligated to talk about it because of how voiceless animals are and how not seriously people tend to take veganism. So I think I've become more entranced in animal rights because, in my view, it's the biggest atrocity on this planet at the moment. It involves the most oppressed beings on the planet, but the least amount of people are taking it seriously, which is like unbelievable. It should be the other way around, right? So I think over time, seeing how passionate people are about human rights, which is a good thing. I'm all for the rights of everybody and like equal treatment. I'm against transphobia, homophobia, racism, all those things, speciesism. But there's so many people already talking about that. And I will talk about those things from time to time, but I've become stronger in my advocacy, just seeing how people react to animal rights, especially people who are so passionate about these other things, but then just kind of like go bacon though when it comes to the worst kind of atrocity on the planet. It's horrific.
Could you be with somebody who isn't vegan?
I get this question a lot. I mean, the thing is, like, love is not like I don't believe it's like a rational thing. I think you don't really choose who you love. It kind of just occurs in your own brain. So I have a hard time believing that I could because of my values, and it's hard to be with someone who does something I despise. But that's not to say that maybe for some reason I could have this weird feeling for them. In my experience, though, like, I mean, I've only dated vegans for the past like 5 or 6 years, and it's not hard to do being a heterosexual male in a female-dominated demographic, right? I think it's like 1/3 of vegans are men and then 2/3 are women. So it's a lot easier for me, I guess. And what I do online, like not only am I a vegan, but like what I do online like all the time is animal rights advocacy. So it'd be hard to imagine like somebody actively participating in this thing that I'm constantly bitching about online all the time, and then I'm like also in love with them. It just doesn't really make any sense. So
Prior to going vegan, did you ever think, there's no way I could go vegan?
maybe for like 10 minutes, but then my brother, because he went vegan, he came home with like different mock stuff, and I was, for some reason, I liked them a lot. I think a lot more than the average person likes them when they first try them. I'm not sure why. To this day, I don't know why, but mock stuff just always sat right with me. Maybe because although mock stuff is very accurate, I think like a lot of it's like 95% accurate or like 90% accurate, and maybe like the full-on flesh and all that kind of stuff grosses me out a little bit. That's why even if lab-grown meat were to come out, maybe I'd try it for like fun, but I don't think I'd ever make an effort to eat it if it was cell for cell and the same thing or like molecularly identical to the real thing.
Do you take any supplements to compensate for being vegan?
I like that you said to compensate for being vegan, because if I wasn't vegan, I would still be taking this supplement. And I do take a multivitamin, and it contains B12 in the form of methylcobalamin, vitamin D3, iodine, zinc, and all these other things. It's a multivitamin, right? But the main things I care about is the B12, the iodine, and the vitamin D3. And I do take protein powders as well. Not that that's necessary for a vegan. I was taking protein powder before being vegan in the form of whey. And same with creatine. I was taking creatine before being vegan, and I take it now as well for the strength benefits and muscle benefits. And for anyone listening, like, just so you know, there is creatine, yes, found in animal products, but a lot of it can be converted into creatinine. That's why I was taking creatine supplements before being vegan, and as do many people today who are not vegan. Creatine monohydrate is like highly consumed across the board. So I just got to say, I like the fact that you said for being vegan, because honestly, if I wasn't vegan, I'd still be doing this. But yes, vegans should be more attentive to things like B12.
Do you have a favorite quote you'd like to share?
I'd say for the average person who isn't a psychopath, the reason that we give humans the right to be free and the right not to suffer and die also exists within animals, and that reason is sentience. That's always a summation of my views on this whole topic.
Do you have any success stories you'd like to share? Maybe where you've helped somebody or you just witnessed somebody?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because a lot of it is in the form of just like messages like, hey, like you made me go vegan, or hey, I've been vegan for 6 months now is because of your content, those are just very like minimal exchange kind of success stories, right? Where I just say like, oh, awesome, cool. But maybe people close to me, like 4 years ago, before I did any of this stuff online, I made a girlfriend of mine vegan at the time, close friends. They're still vegan too, to this day. And it felt good for sure. I mean, to just know that they went through with it. In terms of like a success story, like a super like glamorized thing, it was fairly simple. I mean, it's more like just showing them the documentaries, Gary Yourofsky's speech, giving them the arguments, showing them the footage, and making them realize like, wow, I'm supporting this thing that is so easy to not support, and it's out of line with my moral system. I'm gonna stop supporting it. And it's very dry, but it's what it is, and I think it's what a lot of it really is at the end of the day. Like when somebody goes vegan, it's as simple as that. This violates my ethical code, so I'm gonna stop violating it and do something else.
When it comes to encouraging others, is there anything, tips you could share, anything that's advantageous to do over other things maybe?
I have a little bit of a moral dilemma with this one, because the animals obviously want you to go vegan instantaneously, but practically speaking, in the way that the human mind works, it isn't always the best idea to do it instantaneously, because you might feel overwhelmed, you might do it incorrectly, suffer some health problems, and then never do it again. So I tell people, the animals want you to speed it up, but understand that you can reasonably take your time, learn what you need to do so that you can do this long term. You know, maybe it seems more noble for someone to just instantly do it, and it probably is, but if that comes at the expense of not knowing how to do it properly, and then the occurrence of health problems, which leads them to no longer do it long term, I would say that in that scenario, going instantly is not the right thing to do. Don't be overwhelmed. There are thousands of guides online. If you just look up how to go vegan, it's overwhelming, the amount of resources that are online. So start there. Get a B12 supplement, the first thing you should do. Probably just get a multivitamin, honestly. If you feel good on your current calories, try to match your calories. If you don't know what you're eating, maybe try to like count what you've been eating and then just match it. Because a lot of times people will begin to undereat when they go plant-based because they'll fall into like the raw vegan crowd or like the fruitarian crowd. Without wanting to, they'll undereat because a lot of those foods are very low in calories but high in volume. You know, stay away from there's a lot of pseudoscience in the vegan community, a lot of fad diets and stuff. Stay away from that. Try to listen more so to the evidence-based medical doctors, the plant-based dietitians, and they'll all kind of say the same thing, you know, like an appropriately planned, well-balanced diet that includes a variety of foods that is in a good amount of calories is sufficient alongside like a B12 supplement. Just don't listen to the pseudoscience. There's too much of that in the vegan community for sure.
So what do you think about these Atkins, paleo, keto, carnivore people?
Yeah, I have some pretty strong opinions on them, especially the ancestral crowd. So I could start there. Paleo eating and the ancestral eating crowd, a lot of times they'll use the health outcomes of hunter-gatherers and our ancestors to justify the claim that we should be eating like them. And there's a huge problem with this kind of reasoning. I don't think a lot of them realize it, and it's called survivorship bias. Our hunter-gatherers and stuff, they didn't have access to modern medicine. And a lot of people will say to these ancestral people, why would you want to live like the people that died at age 30 and had an average rate of mortality, like, you know, like being like 35 years old or whatever? And they'll respond, well, that's because of infant mortality, right? They'll say, like, when you take out the infant mortality, it actually, like, they end up living very, very long. And this is actually true. And I believe it's around 50% of mortality happens in infancy, and then I think 30% happens in like childhood. And the reason for this is because of lack of access to modern medicine. So what's happening from like an evolutionary perspective is that this scenario is selecting for a fit population to begin with. Yet all the sick people dying off, okay, in infancy and in childhood, and then you have the people that didn't, without modern medicine, living super long lives, being super healthy. So this is called survivorship bias, where you're looking at a particular population that is there's just a huge bias there. This is a fit population, just from like genetically, right? And so you can't be looking at this population as a justification for the claim that we should be consuming ancestrally. These people are a fit population. Another reason why, and it's speculated that disease has gone up in our populations today because of things like modern medicine. Like, just think about it. If you have a population of people that are now getting past infancy and childhood, who are more prone to diseases, who would have otherwise died had they not like had modern medicine, if you have that happening, now you have a giant boom of people who were supposed to die that didn't die, and they're likely to have more problems going up along the way, like through the aging process. And this way, chronic disease now goes up. So modern medicine, in some weird, unintuitive way, or counterintuitive way, might actually be increasing disease prevalence. All right, and people will attribute this to like things like food, and that might also play for sure. Yeah, so basically the ancestral crowd, they look at the health outcomes of a biased population, and they say, look how robust their health is, look how healthy they are. We have to be eating like them. And it's just bad science. It's just like you are not taking into account survivorship bias and the fact that this is just a fit population. And keto, I mean, I'm not against keto in the plant-based sense, assuming it's low in saturated fat, because you can do plant-based keto. But my issue with keto is more so that a lot of people will attribute the things they experience on the keto diet to keto per se, when in reality they're just consuming a calorie deficit, which can lead to good health outcomes like losing weight and no longer being overweight or obese, just comes with its improvements in various health markers. If you're consuming a very high saturated fat keto diet, I mean, now your health increasing and your weight going down is coming at the expense of your arteries. And according to the literature, your chances of developing cardiovascular disease is significantly higher. That's my issue with them. And then, of course, there's the animal aspect of it. Keto people that are non-vegan are eating a load of animal products, probably more than they were eating prior, which means more suffering. And now, the vegan community is not perfect by any means either. We have our range of pseudoscience, as I mentioned earlier, and we as a movement should definitely be interested in conveying things in as objective a manner as possible. There's no reason to exaggerate the health benefits of a vegan diet. It has enough, and the environmental benefits are there as well, as are the ethical.
Is there anything about vegans that annoy you, or you wish that they would change?
Yes, there are definitely things about vegans that annoy me. There are certain vegans, I call them the misanthropic vegans. They're the vegans that probably do that thing I said to not do earlier, which is primarily follow animal slaughter footage. These vegans tend to be miserable. The way they view the world is just like, fuck humanity, fuck people, fuck anything to do with the human race. They're very miserable, they're depressed. Sometimes I'll post something. In the midst of all of my animal rights advocacy, I'll post one thing about a human rights thing, and they'll just message me saying, like, wow, so I guess you just don't care about the animals anymore. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, I post about them like 99% of the time, but occasionally I'm going to talk about this too. These are people that at the root are misanthropic for sure. There's also vegans that maybe being vegan is a huge part of their identity to a degree. Now, I don't have a problem with people being passionate about it. I have a YouTube channel with the word vegan literally in it, but it's become such an identity that they become an ideologue, and any sort of position against the vegan position, they immediately object to. And it's just not very reasonable or objective way to function if we want our movement to be based in truth. So if somebody is going to come here and debunk some particular health claim that was in a vegan documentary, these types of vegans are going to automatically be on the defense. They're not going to be open to alternative data. They're just going to immediately just like be dismissive and get emotional, and that's not good. We need to be open to criticism, and it's actually very important because we want to attract as many intelligent people as we can into the movement so that we're stronger. Let me see, what else do I hate about vegans? These are a minority, I feel, but the ones that like, they'll see vegan products like junk food, which obviously isn't healthy, and they feel the need to just comment on the page. And this happens mainly on Facebook and Instagram. They'll be like, oh, no thanks. Or they'll be like, not healthy. And it's like, dude, we all know it's unhealthy. Like, the purpose of this product isn't to be healthy. It's to help the environment or animals or whatever. And so there's like these super health-oriented vegans that almost they treat the health aspect of veganism in the same way that people treat the ethical aspect, which to me is not reasonable. I mean, health is a matter of you and you, not like you and others. It can be in a certain scenario if you have family and you don't want to die and they're going to suffer because they value you. But in the general case, like, people should be allowed to eat what they would like. A lot of these health vegans, man, they stress over this stuff, and it's just like, you're acting like this product isn't vegan or something. Some even said that. I've seen that before. They're like, oh, this isn't vegan. It's like, why? Because it's super unhealthy in process. It's like, what? So there might be a little conflation or equivocation happening where they're equivocating between animal rights and health when it comes to the term vegan.
You know, in the beginning, I was a closet vegan for the first 5 years, and then I became an advocate when I realized how healthy it actually is. And then I realized, oh, it's actually even healthier. And then I realized, well, it isn't always. And a lot of the original vegans were ethical vegans. They weren't, health at all. So it started in the 40s. 40 years later, we have whole food plant-based coined, and then 40 years later, it all merges. And then we kind of got a mess right now because some of the ethical oriented, they're like, the food's got to taste good, add salt, add oil, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, they get heart disease. Next thing you know, all the non-vegans are like, that's killing you. So it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, or whatever.
Right,
but
yeah.
I really wanted to redefine veganism and make it something that's more health oriented. So it could be something that people will stick with and, witness being advantageous.
there's just too many people using the word vegan to mean ethics, others using it to mean health. There's just a lot of confusion, and people are using different definitions of the word, which is causing all this confusion. And then you have the ethical vegans saying that ex-vegans don't exist, or like that vegan was never vegan, they were plant-based, and like you have all this like terminology just battling. It's like people say like, oh, the term ethical vegan is like redundant or like a misnomer. Like it's like, because by definition vegan means ethical. But then if you go on Google, there's definitions that say a vegan is just somebody who does not consume these products, which has no ties to ethics. It's just like what you put in your body. So there's just a lot of confusion about all this. I don't get too worked up over it anymore. I used to, and then I realized how trivial this was. But there's definitely value in advertising the health aspect of a vegan diet, because there are people who just don't care about animals, and if the ethical arguments will do nothing for them. I still think there's value in secondarily going to the health benefits, because in consuming a plant-based diet, for selfish reasons, they are still reducing demand for animal agriculture, which reduces supply, and supply in this case is bred into existence animals that will suffer and die. So that is still something that I will do, but I will start with ethics though, because you can consume a healthy version of a non-vegan diet if you want, but not an ethical one. And just an example, if someone eats chicken once every 2 weeks, like one serving, it's not gonna make or break your health, but ethically there's a problem there. And same with the environment. Why I don't start with the environment, because you could technically, personally consume animal products at a sustainable rate, but not an ethical rate. Another example, if you eat one serving of meat per month, you're good. But it's like, oh, but once a month you're now funding, animals suffering and dying. So I'll start with the ethics, and then I will go into health. And even still, if someone's into the ethics, I might even still go into the health, because people at the root, a lot of them can be selfish. And not that this is necessarily a bad thing. You got to look out for yourself and your health, whatever. So you got to appeal to that as well, for sure.
What if a doctor told you you had to eat animal products, otherwise you were gonna die?
I would ask for the evidence. I don't always trust my doctor, and I'm not anti doctor or pharmaceutical or anything like that. I've had doctors that have told me things that I knew weren't true. It's hard for me to take claims like that seriously that conflict so much with what I've read. Maybe I'd ask what nutrient is in there that I need that I can't get from a supplement or plants, blah, blah, blah,
Will you eat lab-grown meat?
Maybe once, but consistently, probably not. And that'd probably be for health and repulsion reasons. Unless there's a way to manipulate them and there's lower saturated fat and that doesn't compromise the taste, and maybe more. Who knows, right? I'll have to see.
You think it's expensive to be vegan?
Oh, no. No, I mean, not categorically or not inherently. Absolutely not. Just like a non-vegan diet, you can consume an expensive vegan diet. You can consume an expensive non-vegan diet. But there's ways to actually save money as a vegan. So maybe it could be a bit more time intensive because you got to cook a little bit, but just because you have to cook a little bit doesn't mean it's expensive. It's still by definition not expensive. I save money, honestly, as a vegan, especially if you side more on the whole foods side and you're not eating all the processed stuff, you will save money. Now, occasionally I will buy it, but not to any expensive degree or frequency. It's just here and there. I'll just get a product or two. I know some people, man, they go to the store and they just vegan ranch, vegan cheese, vegan meats, everything. I'm yeah, that can add up. But for me, it's not. I don't do that.
Do you have a favorite vegan junk food?
There's these corn dogs from Field Roast that are really good. They're absolutely insane. Probably the best, I think, commercial vegan food I've had. And it's odd because I never even ate corn dogs growing up, and I just love it. Just don't microwave them. Make sure you air fry it or put it in an oven like a not lazy person. I was that lazy person and made the mistake at one point. My inner 8-year-old, love chicken tenders and burgers and stuff like that, donuts, pizza. I definitely have an American in me. I was raised in South Florida, so growing up I was eating Burger King and all that stuff. Ice cream, Haagen-Dazs has really good vegan ice cream. The consistency is crazy. Brave Robot makes lab-grown whey protein filled ice cream, so it has this nice creaminess to it. definitely a dairy feel. Yeah, I mean, I can go on. I love food a lot.
You think we'll ever see a vegan world?
It's a good question. I mean, we've yet to see a non-racist world or a non-sexist world. So it's tough to say. A mostly vegan world seems more likely, given what I've said about racism and sexism. And if we don't see anything like that, we'll probably still see a world devoid of animal agriculture, from the replacing lab-grown meat and plant-based mock products, probably for environmental reasons, because in the name of the environment, I mean, we can't be doing this for as long as we'd have to come in the coming years, and the population is growing, which means the demand for it's growing, and so possibly. But a plant-based world, I think, is very likely, or a lab-grown meat / plant-based world, very likely, just because of how unsustainable, how inefficient and unbelievably stupid animal agriculture is. I mean, talking about getting like 10% of the calories you put into the animals in return in the form of animal products, it's just insane. It's like, why would you? It's like a 1 to 10 ratio. It's awful. Instead, you could just eat the plants, like directly, right?
You said some people, like, it was an annoying vegans question. Like you said, some vegans, veganism is all about their life. Do you feel like it's a salient aspect of your life, or are you pretty well balanced? Like, what other kind of stuff do you like to do? You like to work out? And
Yeah, no, I try to be more diverse in my life endeavors, I guess. Like, for example, I work out. I'm a drummer. I don't have my drum set with me now, so it's kind of sad, but still, I'm very big into music. And most of my friends are not vegans. I have a lot of vegan friends, but just as a matter of statistics, most of them aren't. So I still engage with them. I'm still friends with them. They know my views about my channel. They have no argument against my position. Like, they know that what they're doing is like wrong, but they just haven't made the switch. I like to keep myself in check, and you don't want to just get stuck in the vegan bubble and just make your life surrounded by just veganism, and all you do is go to Veg Fest and stuff. Those are amazing events, and I will go to those, and I do, and animal rights conferences. But there's more to life than this stuff as well. There's other movements you could be participating in. Just for my psychology, I feel I do better not just going all into one thing. Now, I'm basically all into this in terms of my advocacy, but I'm saying there's a time when I turn my computer off and I need a break, like for mental health reasons, and like, I don't want to burn out like some activists have in the past. So it's actually a good thing in the name of preventing burnout to be diverse in what you do in life, while still mostly, putting your attention toward animal rights.
what do you do for a living?
Well, right now I do a lot of online personal training, and then YouTube. And I'd like to eventually not do personal training. I like it to an extent, and I get close to my clients, and we get really tight, and I really want them to thrive. But ultimately, once my YouTube efforts take off to a certain degree, I probably will stop personal training and put everything into it. Basically, I want Lifting Vegan Logic to be like my full-time thing.
And how would you like to see that evolve? Would you like to maybe get a studio somewhere, or do a different kind of production?
Yeah, I have ideas. I'd like to do podcasts and stuff. At some point, I'd imagine that I would deviate sometimes away from animal rights, or try to maybe connect things to see that it's relevant here. Just because there's other things I'm passionate about as well. And I think over time, and I've already kind of seen this, I think on YouTube especially, people, if they really subscribe to your work and they really like you, they might end up just liking your content for you. And I hope that's the case. I hope, that's what I can long-term achieve. That way, my YouTube channel could be this thing where it's mostly going to always be like veganism and animal rights, but sometimes I might want to talk about this, because in the end, I care about calling out unreasonable behavior and just stupid shit. So veganism is not the only avenue, but it is a great one, like I said at the beginning of this, and I love it.
Do you engage in any other kind of activism? Do you go to vigils or conferences? Or
It's been a while since I've done that. I used to be in an animal rights club back in UCF, which is the second largest university in the U.S. and I was one of the officers, and we went to like animal rights conferences in Washington, D.C., the one in L.A., and we used to table and get like the change my mind signs out, and we would just debate people. Yeah, at some point I want to start doing that again. I haven't in a bit. I've been more like cooped up in my room doing a lot of online advocacy and things like that. But I very much enjoy in-person stuff as well, going outside, things like that. So I'll probably get back into it. Vigils, I've never been to a vigil, and I don't know if I'd be able to handle it, to be honest. So it's tough. Yeah, and conferences are cool, and veg fests are cool, which aren't really activism, but they're still, you know.
Vegan Summerfest, you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't.
It's a really awesome one. Last question here. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to share, or any last minute encouraging words?
Yeah, I guess I would say like some people can feel a little like hopeless at some points, like vegans especially. It can seem on the surface that progress isn't being made, but just look around. I mean, the demand for products is creating all these new products. More and more people are going vegan like, as the days go on. And if you want to get involved in activism, there's so many ways. You don't have to be like a debater or a debunker or a speaker. There's food pages, there's so many ways you can get involved. In times where you feel like giving up, I mean, just think about what it is you're actually fighting for. And what I mean by that is just remember the footage you've seen and the conditions that you're trying to eradicate. And that should be enough. The production of feelings toward animals and why you should keep doing what you're doing. I don't know if I can plug myself or like whatever, but YouTube channel is Lifting Vegan Logic. On Twitter, it's @vegan_logic. And then on Instagram, it's @lifting_vegan_logic. And then I'm on TikTok too, but I don't do much shit on there, to be honest.
You want to flex before you go?
Just go to my Instagram. You'll see all the flexing is there.
All right, man. Well, thanks for your time, man. You're awesome. And
yeah, thank you for having me.
Call it a wrap.